going to get started if we could. I'm going to introduce Libby Jones. Libby Falk Jones is past president of the Kentucky State Poetry Society. Her poems have been published in regional and national journals and anthologies, including Still, Anthology of Appalachian Writers, the Merton Seasonal, and the New Growth Recent Kentucky Writing. She is the author of 2 books of poems, Above the Eastern Treetops, Blue, and with 4 other Berea poets, Balance of 5. Please welcome Libby Jones.
Thanks, Pam, for the introduction. And it's certainly a joy to be here in kind of wearing 2 hats. The Kentucky State Poetry Society is a lovely group of people, writers, primarily poets, but any kind of writer would enjoy the organization. And we do gather once a year for a conference. And I want to be sure that everyone here has information about the coming conference because it is this fall in Berea. There will be writing workshops, readings, just a chance to hang out with a lot of interesting people who love words. Tina Parker is the current president of KSPS, and I hope to see all of you here this fall for this event. We're really very lucky to be having it. It will be at the Appalachian Center. And again, even if you don't consider yourself a poet, there'll be workshops that will lead people into writing. Young people can participate as well. And it just should be a very creative space. So I hope that you will join us. It's also nice to be able to be here wearing the hat of a poet. I think at last year's Book Fest, one of the featured books was Balance of 5, which I was lucky enough to be able to collaborate with wonderful Berea poets, 2 of whom are here, Barbara Wade and Vicki Hayes. Our colleague and friend Dorothy Hopkins-Schneer is also part of this, and Tina Parker. But I had to miss the Book Fest when we were introducing the book. So it's great to be able to read a couple of poems to you today from the book. And as I thought about what of my poems would be most fun to share, I was very influenced by the season. Here we are, we should be in spring. It hasn't been springy enough yet for me, so I kept thinking warm. So I thought it would be fun to try to invoke a spring through some reading. So the first poem starts in February, but I think you'll see that warm weather gets into it, and it's called Record February. Or I guess you could say, as you'll understand from the poem, Record February. Okay. Thinking the old cat may not last until summer, I invite him to my lap, smooth back his brows until each breath's a purr. He doesn't mind the microphone. I scratch, he purrs. When he's wheezed to silence, I hit rewind, then press play. A serenade swells forth, a roar as loud as katydids, rhythmic as raindrops, inexorable as the attic fan. Roger and I took our first bike ride of the season this week. It was still too cold for me and it was really windy, but it reminded me of the celebration of the season that biking is. And I have a little poem called Bike Song. Bike Song. The wheels say click and whir, my heart says thump. I'm up and off, and spokes throw shadows on the road, and sparks shoot from my hands, knees, toes, ears, and the wind whistles, and birds whisper, and the sun stops turning because I'm turning. I'm making music, making art, making empty, making full, making free, free, free. Have you ever felt like that on a bike ride? That one was fun to write, too. My poems generally arise from my lived experience, a combination of kind of embodiment in experience, and then the language that parallels those. So I'd like to read another spring poem from the collection that Pam mentioned, book that came out a few years ago, New Growth, Recent Kentucky Writing. And I do have a couple of copies of this book over there if you would like to take a look at it or even take a copy home. It's a collection of nonfiction, fiction, and poetry in this volume. And Frank X. Walker was the editor of the poetry section. And two of my poems were included, and this one is called First Spring Back in Kentucky. And this arose a few years ago when Roger and I had spent the winter and spring up in Michigan 1 year. And when we got back to Berea in May, it was kind of summer, So then the next year, here I was in Kentucky, my first spring back in Kentucky, and this was sort of the eye-opening experience. And it really becomes a poem about what we remember and what we forget. First spring back in Kentucky. How could I have forgotten the middle of April? Red buds, sly glances, floats of pink dogwood blossoms outside the window where I stand with my tea. Hallelujah chorus of crabapple buds, bees wakening from their white, sweet dream. Frilly hats on tips of shagbark hickory branches, more shades of green than in the biggest Crayola box. I need to remember to applaud the peony stalks that crack the earth, unfolding fern fronds, to welcome even the weeds, traces of mint on my fingers. Imagine the river birch Mother hoped to stay home for, leaves thin, silver in evening light. I think writing a poem is starting somewhere, and then it's a process of discovery. And so for me, those real scenes, standing in my kitchen with my tea and looking at the dogwood, thinking about how quickly I had forgotten and what I need to remember, and then this flash to a memory from 30 years ago, of the river birch in my parents' yard, and my mother's, what turned out to be her last trip to the hospital, and how she had hoped to delay that so that she could see that river birch come into bud. That was a powerful symbol for her in Louisiana of spring, and how that memory for me speaks both to her engagement with life and what I want to have as an engagement with life. But it wasn't in my head when I was writing about the Kentucky spring, but the mind, takes these leaps. So I know of the writers in this room, I know you experience that in your writing as well. That poem, First Spring Back in Kentucky, is also included in my chapbook, and I did want to read an additional poem from the chapbook, and I think that this one invokes some summer. It also invokes some childhood experience and my mother. So it seems a nice segue from what I've just read. It's a travel poem. I find that another way of discovering, and I look at Dory Hubbard, poet here and writer, and I know that her travel, I'm remembering your work about your New York trip. You know, going into a new space is often the way that we discover. We get, as Virginia Woolf would call it, a shock, a moment of being, and then a poem comes forth. Language comes, and you want to explore that. So this poem also combines the lived experience of travel with some memory work, and it's called Air Lullaby. Crossing Costa Rica, we pass the sunset faster than it goes. Dark clouds frame the one light on the wing, a light to tell the spirits we have come. Tomorrow is a new day, my mother always said, smoothing the sheet under my chin, her voice a mountain in the dark. But I liked the old day, playing swinging statues on the grass, teasing crawfish under their mud towers, running for a nickel when the popsicle man jingled. Behind us sinks the sun, lighting up some other world. One last time we touch the cool hand, glimpse the face, while voices whisper round and words pool dark. Below us, fish swim bright, sea turtles drag from mud, earth shivers with light's promise. I think all of my poems end up being about the making of poems. Somehow words beget words. So I'd like to close with one more. I'm extremely happy to see some young writers here in the audience, and I thought that you might enjoy a poem. It's kind of a found poem. Do you know what a found poem is? Have you heard that first? Okay, anybody want to supply that? What's a found poem? What would you guess from the term? How could you find a poem? What do you think, Snake? It's hanging on a tree, right? And you pick it off. Well, really, it's found, it's language that exists in some form out there. And normally when you write a poem, you generate your words, right? You're making up your words. But in the found poem, you find somebody else's words, but you're the one who sees that that could be a poem. So I'm the one who found it. But in this case, it was my 4-year-old. It's really his poem, okay? And in fact, this poem is called My 4-Year-Old's Dream Work. And I think you'll understand the situation here. Okay, he's 4 years old. Okay, he just woke up, right? First, it was a swimming pool in the dinosaur ages. Then volcanoes started to flow. Then it became a dinosaur. And you were in it, but not the cat. And Rafe and me and you and Daddy were there. I dreamed I got aided by a dinosaur. I got aided by a diplodocus. I saw the inside of his mouth and his tonsils. Dinosaurs have tonsils just like we do, and they also have tongues. When I got to his tummy, I saw the bones. The scariest part was getting aided. I woke up in my bed, and there I was again, all asleep, and then I opened my eyes. I thought I saw kind of dinosaur teeth on the window. I came and got you. Next time, dream me in, and I'll fight that dinosaur. You would need a bazooka and a sword to do that. Dream them for me. We don't live in a dinosaur age. By then he was awake, so okay, it was just a dream. But I loved being able to work with his language, and as you might guess, when he started this telling, I actually said, wait a minute, and I went and got a pencil and a piece of paper so I could find that poem. I wouldn't have to trust my memory. So, well, it's been a joy to share language with you today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting BookFest.